Okay, so what we're looking at here is the repository viewer for Manta after we've gone out and done all that crunching of your code. Now, in my example here, I've got just about every technology that we support, of all those different flavors that we spoke about. A typical site is probably going to have some, subset of these. And what we're doing is illustrating that metadata in its natural hierarchy, whatever that might be. This happens to be Microsoft SQL Server, and we see databases and schemas, and there's tables beneath them. Same thing is going to be true for any of these typical hierarchies that we might be familiar with. What I'm going to show you in this situation for the use cases we've described is I'm going to start with a report. And this could be the report that an analyst is concerned about because they don't like the numbers. And so they really want to, really reach into that source and provenance use case that Tim spoke about to understand and get some trust of where this data actually came from. And by the same token, also look at both the root cause analysis use cases and the impact analysis use cases that might come out of the owners of this particular report or the developers that are putting it together. So you select a particular object, you can double click it or drag it over here if that is appropriate. But then you set up what you want for your first view of Lineage and go ahead and hit visualize. Now what it's doing is it's rendering this diagram by going into the graph database that we keep for all the lineage that we've been parsing from your source code. And it gives you this first view of that lineage diagram where you see some of the colors and things that Tim was showing you earlier. Now this is important because lineage can get very complicated, and we're always endeavoring to make lineage easier to consume. And so one of the first places we like to do that is to give you some color coding to understand where you are. If you only have 2 or 3 objects, it may not be important. But if you have 10, 20, 30, maybe many more, maybe hundreds of objects on the page, an initial way to understand which pieces you're looking at, or the analogy that Tim spoke of earlier, which constellation do you want to look at to start, is important. So you can see we do a lot of color coding. This one's fairly obvious. Everything in this color here is identified as Oracle. Over here we see some, in this case, Informatica, ETL, and everything else in here is actually Microsoft SQL Server. And I'll show you a little bit more of that in just a second. But it's easy to get lost. We don't want you to be lost. So you can always center yourself back at the start node, where the start node, as you can see in this color, is the object that you began your lineage on. It's kind of like you're standing on an island and you're looking at lineage from that point of view. In this case, customers is a report, and so everything is upstream. Now, the next thing that needs to happen is that we can drill deeper. So you have the opportunity to go into, in this case, detailed columns, and then take this color paradigm even farther. So that if you click on a particular column within a lineage, you can actually see where you are while you're performing that research. And the same is true if I look up here a little bit farther and I say, oh, here's a stored procedure. This is the body of that stored procedure. I'm going to expand it also. And if I decide I'm going to put my focus over here for a moment, this one turns yellow, where everything is upstream in that color, everything downstream is in this color. So again, doing everything we can to help you focus your point of research. If I expand this particular table, we can take a look at some of the detailed transformations that occur, especially important in the root cause analysis scenario. It's a simple example, of course, but if I want to know how a number was derived or a mathematical expression, what Manta is doing is looking across all those different code types and samples and programs, and whether it's Java or ETL or SQL, we're going to bring up and surface the actual transformations. Now visually, I can see that the full name is actually calculated by bringing together the family name and the first name. But if I wanted to see the actual syntax of that, I can do so by looking at this detailed metadata window and see the expression itself, or if I needed to document that expression, I could certainly grab it out directly and see what that calculation truly looks like. In the scenario where I want to do impact analysis, I might be a DBA who's looking at a particular table like this one here for REP_client, and I can actually pivot, if you will, the lineage diagram, almost like you think of doing a spreadsheet, and switch this to become the primary point. Right? So when you're standing on that island, you're looking at lineage from that point of view. So we're only seeing REP_client as it's known to customers' lineage. But if I restart the visualization for this element, it will now reflect what's going downstream, and maybe there's more reports. This is particularly important in those situations with data privacy. We might not know all the different places where my data is being splashed to. So we have to look at it from both places. So we can see there's this customer report, but there's dozens of views out here. There's 3, okay. But there's many more views that are coming out of this REP_client looking downstream, and those are other things I might need to investigate. One other critical part of the aspects of lineage is to understand lineage history. So one of the things that Manta does is keep time slices of your lineage. And you know, any of us that have been into the business intelligence space have had that scenario where an analyst comes into our office with their hair on fire and says, I have to know how this report was calculated last September or last week or last month or 2 quarters ago. And so we can come in here and look at an element that we call a revision, which is a time slice for whenever that metadata is analyzed, and go back in time and just look at the lineage and examine it just like we just did before for that particular point in time. But perhaps even more valuable is to be able to do this as a comparison and to compare 2 revisions to actually see, especially now the root cause analysis use case or situations where we need to actually see what went wrong or what was right that is not wrong now. I can go back and actually do a comparison for the lineage, and in this case go back to a point November of 2018 for that same customer report. And so now, make a slight change to one of my filters, I'm going to run a comparison. And what this does is changes the color recognition just slightly, such that everything that is the same for this particular report across these 2 periods is going to show up in gray, and everything that is new is in green. But we have the opportunity to highlight what has changed in the lineage path over time, such that everything in red is what occurred 18 months ago, and everything in green is the current revision of today. And again, this answers also a lot of these different use cases, depending on what we're trying to find. They were even looking for a breach that occurred a long time ago, and we want to know exactly what was used, perhaps which code or which constellation actually caused that breach to occur.